What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle was wrong? What if the story that's been told for years of a modern, caring, compassionate duchess was only part of the truth, the part we were allowed to see, the part carefully curated, polished, and packaged for the world? Behind closed doors, in private conversations, in moments the cameras never captured, another story was unfolding. One that Prince Harry has only now begun to reveal. A confession so shocking, so deeply personal, that it could forever change the way we view one of the most scrutinized families in the world. And at the center of it all, allegations so explosive, they involve not just public figures, but children, his children, Archie and Lilibet Diana. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the weight of that secret. Imagine holding a truth so heavy that speaking it could shatter the public image of someone you once loved with your whole heart. Prince Harry has carried that burden for years, and now he's choosing to break the silence. It all began on a quiet afternoon, far from the prying eyes of the media. A phone call, a conversation meant to stay private, and yet, somehow, the words spilled out. The confession. Harry's voice, strained, emotional, confessional. He had tried to shield the world from it, tried to protect his children, and tried to keep peace within the family. But at some point, the weight became too much. And what he revealed, well, it was nothing short of shocking. You might be asking yourself, why now? Why reveal this information after years of silence, after countless interviews, documentaries, and public appearances? The answer is complicated. Part of it is the escalating tension between what is known publicly and what has been lived privately. Part of it is the relentless media scrutiny, which has turned personal struggles into public spectacles. And part of it is the undeniable need to protect his children. Because what Prince Harry is revealing isn't just gossip or scandal. It's about the safety, the well-being, and the emotional stability of Archie and Lilibet Diana. From the outside, the picture seems straightforward. A royal family, facing internal conflicts, with the usual mixture of tradition, expectation, and media frenzy. Meghan, the modern duchess, controversial, ambitious, charismatic. Harry, the devoted husband, torn between loyalty and morality. But behind this simplified narrative lies a far more complex story. A story filled with secrecy, betrayal, and moments that, if made public too soon, could ignite an international firestorm. And now, pieces of that story are starting to emerge. What Prince Harry has revealed so far is only the tip of the iceberg. We are talking about events that allegedly involve physical confrontations with his own children. The implications of this are staggering. For decades, the world has followed the royal family, dissected their every move, judged their every decision, and celebrated or condemned them in equal measure. But no one could have anticipated this revelation. Allegations that challenge everything we've been told about Meghan Markle's public persona, her relationship with her children, and the private dynamics within one of the world's most watched families. The tension begins with the children. Archie, bright, curious, innocent, and yet caught in circumstances far beyond his years. And Lilibet Diana, a symbol of hope, love, and family legacy. Imagine being in their position. Navigating childhood under constant public scrutiny, with whispers, rumors, and allegations swirling around your home. Imagine the pressure on Harry, knowing that protecting them involves not just security measures, but also making difficult choices that could risk his own public reputation. The stakes are incredibly high. For years, Prince Harry remained silent. He trusted the system, the family, the protocols. He trusted that keeping things private would shield his children from harm. But silence has a cost. Secrets, no matter how carefully guarded, have a way of leaking. The tension builds quietly at first, subtle signs, small incidents, patterns of behavior that hint at deeper issues. And over time, these incidents accumulate, creating a picture that can no longer be ignored. And now, the confession is out. But what exactly did Harry reveal? What are the details behind these allegations, and how did they come to light? The answers are shocking, layered, and emotionally charged. Because this isn't just about one moment of anger or frustration. It's about a pattern, a series of events that, according to Harry, paint a picture far different from what the public has been led to believe. And this is where the story begins to take shape, piece by piece, as we dive into the private world of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. We also have to consider the global implications. The royal family isn't just a private institution. It's a symbol, a cultural touchstone, an emblem watched and analyzed by millions. When secrets like these emerge, they don't just affect the family. They affect public perception, media narratives, and international discourse. Prince Harry's confession doesn't exist in a vacuum. It challenges long-held beliefs, it disrupts carefully maintained images, and it forces the world to confront uncomfortable truths about power, loyalty, and family dynamics. Yet, the story isn't simply about allegations and scandal. It's about human emotion, moral dilemmas, and the struggle between love and responsibility. Harry's decision to speak out wasn't made lightly. It was fraught with fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. The very act of revealing the truth carries enormous risk. Not just for Meghan, but for himself, his children, and everyone involved. And that tension is palpable in every word he shared, every glance, every pause in conversation, every moment of hesitation. The confession is raw, intimate, and deeply human. And we haven't even reached the most shocking parts yet. Because what Harry revealed is not just about private conflicts. It's about moments of physical confrontations involving Archie and Lilibet Diana. Moments that, if true, challenge every assumption the public has made about Meghan Markle. Moments that provoke a mixture of disbelief, outrage, empathy, and shock. And yet, these are not just allegations. They are framed within a narrative of concern, protection, and urgent necessity. Harry is not speaking to scandalize. He is speaking to protect, to reveal, and to confront truths that have been buried too long. So what happens next? How does a family, watched by billions, navigate such revelations? How does the public reconcile their affection or admiration for Meghan with these new claims? How does Harry balance loyalty, morality, and love for his children while navigating a media storm unlike any other? The answers are complicated, nuanced, and deeply human, and they will unfold chapter by chapter, revealing a story that is as shocking as it is heartbreaking, as dramatic as it is deeply personal. But before we dive into the first chapter, the private confession that set everything in motion, there's one more thing to consider. These revelations are not just about the past. They are about the present, and they have consequences that ripple outward, affecting family relationships, media narratives, and global perceptions. The world is watching, waiting, and reacting in real time. And yet, much remains hidden, unknown, and uncertain. The confession is only the beginning. And what Harry revealed in that private moment was just the spark. The fire it ignited would spread far beyond the walls of his home, reaching into public discourse, into conversations among fans, critics, and royal watchers around the world. Every detail he shared, every hesitation in his voice, every carefully chosen word carries weight. And as we move into the chapters that follow, we will explore each revelation, each moment of tension, each shocking claim in detail, layer by layer, until the full picture emerges. And so, the question remains, what did Prince Harry reveal? What did he see, hear, and experience that finally forced him to speak? And how did those revelations involve the children, Archie and Lilibet Diana, in ways the world could never have imagined? The answers will take time to unfold, and they will challenge everything you thought you knew. But one thing is certain, the story is only just beginning. What if the world had never known the truth because Harry had stayed silent? Imagine a moment so private, so intimate, that it could have remained buried forever, except he finally spoke. It wasn't on a stage, in front of cameras, or during a carefully scripted interview. It happened in a quiet room, far from the public eye, in the kind of conversation that people normally have only when they feel completely safe, or when the truth becomes unbearable to keep inside. The first words he spoke were hesitant, almost fragile, carrying a weight that few could imagine. "I can't keep this inside anymore," he said. That simple sentence wasn't just a declaration. It was a crack in the armor he had built around his life, around his family, around the world's perception of Meghan. And what followed would set off a chain reaction that would ripple through media outlets, royal watchers, and families everywhere. Harry's confession wasn't one of a fleeting argument or a misunderstood moment. It was a revelation of patterns, of behaviors, and of incidents involving Archie and Lilibet Diana that no parent ever expects to witness, let alone experience from someone they trusted. It was the kind of confession that forces you to question everything you thought you knew about a person, a family, and even your own assumptions. Imagine hearing this from someone you love and trust. Imagine the conflict inside Harry, the fear of shattering a family, the fear of public backlash, the fear of being misunderstood. Yet, in the end, he chose the children. He chose truth. He chose exposure over silence, knowing the consequences could be catastrophic. He began with the first signs, the subtle incidents that at the time didn't seem extreme but, in retrospect, were alarming. Small moments of anger, brief flashes of frustration, actions that hinted at something deeper. Harry described them in painstaking detail, recounting scenes that many would dismiss as trivial but which, together, formed a disturbing pattern. And then came the moments no one expected. Alleged physical confrontations with Archie. Moments that Harry described with a mix of horror and heartbreak. He spoke of times when Archie was scared, confused, and caught in circumstances far beyond a normal child's understanding. The fear in Harry's voice as he recounted these incidents was palpable, making it impossible to ignore the gravity of what he was revealing. But the confession didn't stop there. Lilibet Diana, the youngest, was also involved in incidents that shocked Harry to his core. According to his account, moments of aggression and control escalated in ways that were difficult to reconcile with Meghan's public image. Harry detailed the emotional toll on the children, on himself, and on the family dynamic. He painted a picture of tension that simmered quietly behind closed doors, a tension that finally boiled over into these deeply troubling moments. What made Harry's confession even more compelling and terrifying was the context in which it occurred. He wasn't recounting rumors or repeating hearsay. He was recounting lived experience. He had witnessed it, been directly involved in managing it, and carried the burden of these secrets for years. And in that private moment, he decided the world needed to know, because protecting his children was more important than protecting a public image. Throughout the conversation, Harry emphasized one thing repeatedly. He wasn't trying to shame or destroy Meghan. He wasn't trying to scandalize or create headlines. His focus was the truth and the protection of his children. He wanted the world to understand the gravity of what he had witnessed and experienced, and to recognize that even the most public figures, people who appear flawless on television, on magazine covers, in curated photos, can have private lives that are complex, troubling, and deeply human. The private confession was also filled with contradictions and emotional complexity. Harry spoke about love, loyalty, fear, and heartbreak, often within the same sentence. He described moments when he felt deep affection for Meghan, moments when he doubted his own judgment, and moments when he feared for the safety of his children. The narrative was not simple, and it was not linear. It was messy, chaotic, and profoundly real, just like the family at the center of it. Harry also revealed how he tried to manage these incidents quietly. Counselors, private discussions, attempts to mediate. Everything was done in the hope that the situation could improve without public exposure. But patterns, he explained, cannot always be controlled. Small incidents that seemed isolated revealed a larger, more troubling reality. And the realization of that pattern, that the safety and emotional well-being of Archie and Lilibet Diana might be at risk, was what ultimately forced him to speak out. The tension in that private conversation was almost unbearable. Harry's voice, at times shaking, revealed the depth of his inner turmoil. He spoke of sleepless nights, worry, and the constant balancing act between loyalty to a spouse and duty to his children. Every word carried the weight of secrecy that had been years in the making, and every pause reflected a man wrestling with impossible choices. And just when it seemed that the confession had reached its peak, Harry revealed another layer. An insight into Meghan's behavior that few outside their inner circle had ever suspected. This insight was subtle, almost understated, yet it framed the earlier incidents in a context that made them even more shocking. He described manipulation, control, and emotional pressure that, combined with the alleged physical incidents, created a picture of a family struggling in ways the public had never imagined. Yet, despite the gravity of the confession, Harry's focus remained on the children. He repeatedly emphasized that this was not about revenge, spectacle, or judgment. It was about truth. It was about protection. It was about ensuring that Archie and Lilibet Diana had the opportunity to grow up safe, loved, and understood, even when the adults around them were failing to manage their own conflicts. And the timing of the confession itself was telling. Harry explained that he had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. The private burden had become too heavy, and the risks of remaining quiet, both to his children and to the public narrative, had grown unbearable. Speaking out, he said, was an act of courage, necessity, and ultimately, love. What made the confession even more dramatic was how it was framed, not as a single incident, but as a cascade of events, each connected to the other, each revealing a different facet of a complicated reality. Allegations of physical confrontations, emotional manipulation, and secrecy painted a picture of a family at war with itself, one that the public had never seen, and that the media had never captured. And still, even in this moment of revelation, Harry hinted that there was more. He described a tension in the air, an anticipation of events yet to unfold, and an understanding that once this story reached the world, it would trigger reactions that could not be predicted. It was the calm before a storm that the public had no idea was approaching. So, the question remains, what exactly did Harry reveal in that private conversation? How did he frame the incidents with Archie and Lilibet Diana? And what was it about Meghan's behavior that finally pushed him to break his silence? The answers to these questions are complex, layered, and deeply human. They will unfold in the chapters that follow, revealing a story that is as shocking as it is heartbreaking, as dramatic as it is painfully real. No one noticed at first, or at least, they didn't recognize it for what it was. In any family, there are small disagreements, fleeting moments of tension, and misunderstandings. That's normal. But in the case of Harry and Meghan, the first signs of trouble were subtle, almost invisible, like cracks forming in a building that seems solid from the outside. And once those cracks began to appear, they widened quickly, revealing a reality no one had expected, and certainly no one outside the family could imagine. Harry would later describe these early warning signs as moments that seemed minor at the time, but in hindsight, they were significant. There were changes in behavior, shifts in mood, and small incidents involving Archie and Lilibet Diana that hinted at a deeper problem. It began with subtle frustrations, gestures of impatience, and sharp words that were out of character. A toy thrown a little too hard. A door slammed a little too violently. A word spoken a little too harshly. On their own, these moments might have seemed trivial. Together, they formed a pattern that became impossible to ignore. Harry noticed the first hints in everyday routines. Breakfasts that ended in tears, bedtime struggles that escalated far beyond what was typical for a child, and small but persistent expressions of fear in the eyes of his children. He remembered one particular morning when Archie, barely 4 years old, hesitated to enter a room. His tiny hand gripped Harry's arm, and his normally bright eyes were filled with uncertainty. Harry knew immediately something had shifted. And while he didn't yet understand the full extent of what was happening, he could sense that the household had changed. It wasn't just the children who were affected. Harry himself felt the strain. He began to notice that conversations with Meghan, once filled with laughter and affection, now carried a weight. A tension that seemed to linger in every word, every glance, every gesture. He tried to rationalize it at first. Stress, the pressure of public scrutiny, the constant media attention. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something fundamental had shifted. These early incidents were complicated by the constant presence of public scrutiny. Every move they made was analyzed, every expression dissected, every interaction scrutinized by millions of people online. Harry felt trapped between two worlds, the private reality of his family life and the public expectations of what a royal couple should be. He couldn't confide in friends or family without risking exposure. He couldn't speak publicly without igniting a media firestorm. And yet, ignoring the signs wasn't an option either. One evening, Harry recounted, Archie had been playing in the living room when a disagreement over a toy escalated. Normally, Harry could manage these disputes calmly, redirecting the energy, offering guidance. But this time, something felt different. Meghan's reaction was sharp, abrupt, and filled with anger that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Archie recoiled, stepping back, eyes wide, confused. In that moment, Harry realized the problem wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger pattern that affected not just one child, but both Archie and Lilibet Diana. The stress of these early signs took a toll on Harry as well. He felt torn between his love for Meghan and his responsibility to protect his children. The inner conflict was constant, a relentless tension that followed him throughout every day. He described feeling as though he were walking a tightrope over a canyon, every step requiring careful balance, every misstep carrying potentially catastrophic consequences. And yet, he also felt a sense of urgency. He had to find a way to manage these moments before they escalated into something far worse. Friends and insiders would later recount noticing changes in Harry's demeanor during this time. He became quieter, more introspective, and increasingly cautious about what he shared with anyone outside the household. The weight of responsibility was visible in his posture, in the tired lines etched on his face, in the subtle ways he carried himself. Harry was deeply aware that he was navigating uncharted territory, balancing the well-being of his children against the complexities of his relationship with Meghan. The first signs of trouble weren't limited to minor incidents. Harry described moments of tension that, while brief, carried an intensity that was alarming. A sudden outburst, a sharp tone, or a fleeting expression of anger. All of these small moments accumulated, creating a sense of unease that permeated the household. He could feel the emotional energy shifting, a subtle but undeniable tension that made him constantly vigilant. And it wasn't just physical or verbal cues. Harry noticed emotional subtleties as well. Moments when Archie and Lilibet Diana seemed hesitant to express themselves, when they sought reassurance more frequently, or when they looked to him for safety in ways that suggested fear rather than simple curiosity. Harry described feeling a growing sense of urgency to understand what was happening, to intervene, and to protect his children from experiences they shouldn't have to endure. What made these early signs even more concerning was their pattern. Each incident, on its own, might have been dismissed as a momentary lapse. But together, they suggested a deeper issue, a consistent dynamic that was becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Harry began to document these moments mentally, noting behaviors, timing, triggers, and emotional responses. He tried to anticipate what might happen next, to prevent escalation, but the unpredictability of the situation created a constant state of tension and anxiety. In reflecting on these early moments, Harry realized that the cracks in their family life were not caused by a single event, but by a series of interactions that, over time, created an environment of stress, fear, and uncertainty. The children, sensitive and perceptive, responded to these dynamics in ways that were subtle but telling. Harry could see it in their eyes, in their body language, and in the way they interacted with both parents. And he knew that if these patterns continued, they could have long-term consequences on their emotional development and sense of security. Harry's perspective on these early signs was complicated by the fact that Meghan, in public, maintained an image of composure and charm. This contrast between private and public behavior created a cognitive dissonance that Harry struggled to reconcile. How could someone appear so loving, so caring, so confident in public, and yet exhibit behavior at home that was increasingly alarming? This question haunted him and would later form the foundation of his private confession. And yet, even in the midst of these troubling early signs, Harry attempted to maintain normalcy. He engaged in play with the children, offered reassurance, and tried to create moments of joy and laughter. He encouraged Meghan to participate in these activities, hoping to restore balance and calm. But the tension persisted, subtle and pervasive, growing stronger with each passing day. By the time Harry realized the extent of the problem, the pattern had become undeniable. He began to notice not only the physical and emotional cues from his children, but also changes in Meghan's behavior that suggested increasing control, impatience, and volatility. These early signs, once minor and easily dismissed, had escalated into a consistent dynamic that demanded attention and intervention. And still, Harry remained conflicted. How do you confront someone you love and respect, while also protecting the children you adore? How do you balance loyalty with morality, affection with accountability? These questions weighed on him constantly, shaping every decision, every interaction, every moment of silence. The internal struggle was relentless, and it was only a matter of time before these early signs of trouble erupted into incidents that could no longer be contained. The first signs of trouble were subtle, quiet, and almost invisible. But in hindsight, they were the opening chapters of a story that would escalate into moments of confrontation, confession, and public shock. Harry could feel the tension mounting, a sense that something had to give, that the delicate balance of family life could not be maintained forever. He knew that sooner or later, the private issues would demand a public reckoning, and he would be forced to make difficult choices that could change everything. And as the tension grew, as the cracks widened, Harry understood one undeniable truth. The world as he knew it was about to collide with the private reality he had been hiding. It was supposed to be a normal family afternoon, a simple moment of play, laughter, and bonding, the kind of scene any parent might expect in their household. But for Harry, that afternoon became the first unforgettable moment when the tension he had sensed for months erupted into something far more alarming. Archie, barely 4 years old at the time, was at the center of an incident that would shake Harry to his core and become a defining moment in his decision to eventually speak out. Harry later described it as a moment of shock and disbelief. He had been watching Archie play quietly, building a small block tower, when Meghan entered the room. At first, everything seemed ordinary. Meghan greeted Archie, commented on his work, and the interaction appeared benign. But within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. A disagreement arose over the blocks, a seemingly trivial issue. But the way it escalated, the intensity of Meghan's reaction, and the fear that flashed across Archie's face made Harry realize immediately that this was no ordinary parental correction. Harry recalled that Meghan's tone was sharp, almost biting, unlike the calm and composed demeanor she displayed publicly. Words were exchanged that carried an edge of frustration, and gestures that were sudden and forceful drew a visible reaction from Archie. The little boy recoiled, stepping back instinctively, confusion and fear in his wide eyes. Harry felt a surge of protectiveness, an instinctual need to shield his child from harm. Yet, in that moment, he also felt helpless. This wasn't a moment he could control through reasoning alone. It was visceral, emotional, and deeply troubling. What made the incident even more shocking, according to Harry, wasn't just the physicality of the interaction, but the emotional impact on Archie. The child froze, uncertain of what to do, and the room fell into a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Harry could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief that made it impossible to look away. This was not a minor disagreement. This was a confrontation that carried consequences far beyond the moment itself. Harry later reflected on the patterns leading up to this moment, small incidents that had seemed inconsequential. Raised voices, abrupt corrections, subtle displays of impatience, suddenly took on a new meaning in the context of what had just occurred. This incident wasn't isolated. It was the first visible manifestation of a behavior that, over time, would escalate. Harry described it as a wake-up call, a moment that made him realize that ignoring the tension would no longer suffice. The stakes were higher than ever, and the children's emotional well-being was at risk. The incident also revealed a profound contradiction between Meghan's public image and her private behavior. To the world, Meghan was composed, articulate, and caring, a model of poise under pressure. But in this private moment, Harry saw a side of her that contradicted that image. He noticed impatience, sharpness, and a level of control that, when combined with the physical gestures, created an environment that was confusing and frightening for Archie. This dissonance haunted Harry in the days and weeks that followed. Harry didn't confront Meghan immediately after the incident. Instead, he tried to process it privately, reflecting on what had happened and how to respond without escalating the situation further. He questioned himself constantly. Had he overreacted? Was this truly an alarming pattern, or an isolated moment of frustration? Could he have handled it differently? But the more he reflected, the more he realized that the incident was symptomatic of a broader issue, a tension and volatility that, if left unchecked, could have long-lasting consequences for the children. The emotional toll on Harry was immense. He felt trapped between two impossible choices: protecting his children and maintaining a semblance of family stability, or confronting a behavior that was increasingly concerning and risking a confrontation with Meghan. Every instinct told him to act, yet every consideration of public exposure, media scrutiny, and family loyalty urged caution. It was a tightrope he was forced to walk alone, carrying the burden of awareness and responsibility with no clear guide. What made this incident even more disturbing were the subtle cues Archie displayed afterward. He became quieter, more hesitant, seeking reassurance from Harry in ways that indicated lingering fear. Harry noticed moments when Archie would glance at Meghan with uncertainty or hesitate before following instructions, as if second-guessing how to respond. The emotional impact was visible in ways a 4-year-old could not fully articulate, yet profoundly evident to a parent watching closely. Harry began to recognize that incidents like this could not be ignored. He saw patterns forming. Moments of volatility interspersed with periods of calm, a cycle that was unpredictable and emotionally destabilizing for the children. He understood that if these patterns continued unchecked, they could affect Archie's sense of security, his confidence, and his ability to navigate relationships both inside and outside the family. The implications were terrifying for any parent. And it wasn't just the incident itself that disturbed Harry, it was the aftermath. He found himself replaying the moment over and over in his mind, analyzing what had led to it, questioning whether he had missed early warning signs, and anticipating what might happen next. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, not only for the immediate safety of Archie, but for his longer-term emotional development. The weight of that responsibility was crushing, and it marked the beginning of a pattern of vigilance and protective measures that would define the coming months and years. Harry also began to see the broader implications of such incidents. He realized that while private moments like this were hidden from the public eye, they were shaping the reality of the family's life in ways that would eventually leak into public perception. He understood that secrets carried power, but they also carried consequences, and that the longer these patterns continued, the more damaging they could become, both for the children and for the family as a whole. As Harry reflected on the incident, he also recognized the emotional complexity of his own feelings. He felt love for Meghan, anger at the situation, frustration at the unpredictability, and fear for his children's well-being, all simultaneously. The emotional turbulence was exhausting, yet it provided clarity. He could no longer rely on hope or silence alone. Something had to change, and he would need to confront the situation directly, even if it risked confrontation, exposure, or public scrutiny. This moment with Archie marked a turning point in Harry's understanding of family dynamics, parental responsibility, and the private realities behind public images. It was the first incident that forced him to see the seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences if patterns of behavior continued unchecked. He knew that this was not just a fleeting moment. It was the beginning of a deeper, more complex narrative that would unfold in ways no one outside the family could anticipate. And yet, Harry also sensed that this was only the beginning. If the incident with Archie was alarming, it was a precursor to something even more shocking involving Lilibet Diana. He could feel, even then, that the challenges were not isolated to one child. The tension, volatility, and behavioral patterns were systemic, extending beyond a single incident, and their ramifications would reverberate through the household in unexpected ways. Harry's protective instincts were now fully activated. He began to observe, to monitor, and to anticipate, knowing that any future incidents could escalate further. The memory of Archie's fear, confusion, and hesitation was seared into his mind, compelling him to take action. And yet, even as he resolved to protect his child, he could not predict the events that were about to unfold, a series of moments involving Lilibet Diana that would intensify the tension, deepen the emotional stakes, and ultimately lead to the confession that would shock the world. And so, as Harry reflected on the incident with Archie, he understood one undeniable truth. This was only the beginning. The cracks had appeared, the patterns were forming, and the private reality of their family life was far more complicated and far more troubling. than the world could have ever imagined. It started subtly, just like the first signs with Archie. But with Lilibet Diana, the stakes felt immediately higher. She was smaller, more sensitive, and perceptive in ways that made the tension in the household impossible to hide. Harry would later describe this moment as a turning point, not only in recognizing a pattern of troubling behavior, but in understanding the emotional risk his children faced. The incident unfolded on a quiet evening, in a part of the family home where the children felt safe. Lilibet Diana was playing quietly, her attention fully absorbed in a small activity, drawing, stacking blocks, or arranging dolls. Harry had been observing, keeping a watchful eye from across the room. He noticed immediately that something was off. Meghan's tone had shifted subtly, her demeanor had hardened, and a tension hovered in the air, almost tangible. At first, Harry tried to dismiss it. Perhaps Meghan was stressed, tired, or frustrated. Everyone has moments. But then, the interaction escalated quickly. A disagreement arose over something seemingly trivial, a toy, a request, or perhaps an instruction Lilibet Diana didn't follow fast enough. The way Meghan reacted was swift, forceful, and unlike the composed persona she maintained in public. Harry watched as Lilibet Diana recoiled instinctively, fear evident in her wide eyes, confusion in her small voice. Harry later described the moment with a mix of horror and disbelief. He could see the emotional impact immediately. Lilibet Diana, normally cheerful and confident, froze. She hesitated to respond, unsure of what would happen next. Her body language screamed discomfort, a silent plea for safety and reassurance. And in that instant, Harry felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness, realizing that the incident was far more than a fleeting argument. It was a clear signal of a larger problem. What struck Harry most was the contrast between Meghan's public image and her private behavior. Outwardly, Meghan appeared poised, articulate, and composed, a figure of strength admired by millions. Privately, in these moments, she displayed impatience, sharpness, and at times, aggression that was both unpredictable and alarming. The disconnect between the public persona and private actions created cognitive dissonance that left Harry conflicted, uncertain, and deeply concerned for his children. Harry tried to intervene, to mediate the situation calmly, but the emotional intensity of the moment made it difficult. He described feeling trapped between two impossible priorities: protecting his child and managing the volatile reaction of an adult he loved and respected. Every word, every gesture had to be calculated. Any misstep could escalate the situation further. The tension in the room was palpable, a quiet storm that seemed poised to erupt at any second. The emotional fallout from the incident lingered long after the moment passed. Harry recalled observing Lilibet Diana quietly withdrawing, her energy subdued, her play tentative. Even in the absence of further confrontation, the emotional residue was evident. Harry understood instinctively that these experiences were shaping her perception of safety, trust, and emotional security. The incident left a lasting mark, one that could influence how she navigated relationships, conflict, and authority figures for years to come. This incident was not an isolated event, but part of a developing pattern. Harry noticed recurring themes: subtle aggression, abrupt outbursts, and moments of control that created an environment of unpredictability. For a child, unpredictability equates to insecurity, and insecurity manifests in ways that are visible to anyone attuned to emotional cues. Harry could see it clearly. Lilibet Diana was adapting to a household tension that no child should have to navigate. The experience forced Harry to confront difficult questions about parenting, responsibility, and intervention. How do you protect a child from someone you love? How do you manage the complexities of family dynamics while ensuring emotional safety? Harry described the internal conflict as relentless, a constant mental calculation of risks, actions, and consequences. Each day, each interaction became a delicate balancing act. And yet, even as the incident unfolded, Harry was acutely aware of the external pressures. The world was watching, even if it didn't realize it. Every public appearance, every interaction captured by cameras or observers added layers of stress to a private situation that was already fraught with tension. Harry felt trapped between the need for privacy and the inevitability that the private realities of his family could eventually become public knowledge. He also wrestled with the emotional complexity of the situation. His love for Meghan conflicted with his concern for his children. His desire to maintain family unity clashed with the necessity of addressing troubling behavior. These conflicting emotions created a mental and emotional strain that few could comprehend. Harry described the experience as walking through a minefield, where each step carried potential consequences that could not be reversed. The incident with Lilibet Diana further confirmed what Harry had begun to suspect. The tension in the household was systemic. It wasn't limited to one child or one moment. It was a recurring dynamic with serious implications for emotional safety. He began to see the patterns with clarity, moments of volatility, subtle aggression, and control that affected both children, creating an environment of emotional stress and uncertainty. Harry knew that the situation required intervention, but the method and timing were complex. He had to navigate the incident carefully, balancing the immediate need to protect Lilibet Diana with the longer-term goal of maintaining family stability. He reflected on the necessity of documenting patterns, observing behaviors, and preparing for moments when intervention would be unavoidable. The responsibility weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. What made this moment especially troubling was the realization that these incidents, while deeply private, could not remain hidden indefinitely. Patterns that affected children invariably left traces, emotional, behavioral, and psychological. Harry recognized that without timely action, the consequences for Lilibet Diana and Archie could be profound and long-lasting. The stakes were not just immediate, they were generational. As the incident concluded, Harry felt a mixture of relief, fear, and determination. Relief that Lilibet Diana was physically unharmed, fear for what might happen in the future, and determination that he could no longer ignore the signs. He realized that private observation and hope were no longer enough. He would need to confront the patterns, address the behavior, and ultimately, make decisions that could change the trajectory of the family's life. And yet, even after the incident ended, Harry sensed there was more beneath the surface, layers of behavior, emotional tension, and dynamics that had yet to reveal themselves fully. He understood that this was not an isolated conflict, but part of a broader narrative that would eventually require confession, disclosure, and reckoning. The incident with Lilibet Diana was a stark warning. The private challenges in their household were escalating, and what was coming next could no longer be contained or ignored. And so, as Harry reflected on the incident with Lilibet Diana, he knew that the private reality of their family was far more complicated and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The cracks were widening, the patterns were clear, and the time for silence was over. The weight of responsibility had settled heavily on Harry's shoulders. He wasn't just a husband or a public figure. He was a father, and suddenly, the stakes had escalated to levels he could not ignore. After the incidents with Archie and Lilibet Diana, Harry realized that protecting his children required more than love, patience, or hope. It demanded strategy, vigilance, and, at times, confrontation. Harry's struggle began with observation. Every interaction, every glance, every tone of voice mattered. He watched Archie and Lilibet Diana for signs of fear, hesitation, or confusion. He tracked patterns that suggested stress or emotional discomfort. He monitored Meghan's behavior, not to judge, but to anticipate potential risk. This was parenting in its most intense form, an unrelenting state of awareness, where one wrong move could escalate into something damaging. The emotional toll was immense. Harry described moments when he lay awake at night, replaying incidents in his mind, analyzing what had happened and planning for what might occur next. He questioned himself constantly. Was he doing enough? Could he intervene without causing further harm? Could he maintain his own mental and emotional balance while safeguarding his children? The internal conflict was exhausting, yet inescapable. He also faced the challenge of discretion. The royal family, the media, and the public demanded composure. Any sign of conflict could be misconstrued, sensationalized, or weaponized. Harry couldn't turn to friends or extended family without risking exposure. Every strategy, every decision, had to be carefully calculated to protect not just his children, but the fragile balance of privacy they still possessed. Harry took proactive steps. He began to create safe spaces for Archie and Lilibet Diana within the home, areas where they could retreat from tension and feel secure. He worked to reinforce routines, rituals, and moments of normalcy, knowing that children thrive on predictability. He tried to mediate interactions with Meghan, guiding the children and providing support while attempting to de-escalate potential conflicts. But the struggle was far from straightforward. Every intervention carried the risk of confrontation. Every act of protection could be perceived as criticism or rebellion. Harry had to navigate the delicate balance of maintaining respect for Meghan while prioritizing the children's well-being. It was a constant tightrope walk, one where the wrong step could escalate an already volatile situation. The strain was also psychological. Harry wrestled with guilt. Guilt for not preventing earlier incidents. Guilt for the impossibility of controlling the situation. Guilt for needing to intervene in ways that might be perceived as divisive. He questioned his own judgment and ability to manage the complex dynamics of a household under unprecedented scrutiny. And yet, he could not allow doubt to paralyze him. The children's safety depended on his vigilance and action. Harry also sought guidance from professionals. He consulted with counselors and child development experts, trying to understand the patterns he observed and develop strategies to minimize harm. He approached the situation with humility and urgency, knowing that expertise could provide tools and perspective, but not complete solutions. The reality of the household required direct, active engagement. He could not outsource responsibility, no matter how much support he received. In addition, Harry struggled with the emotional complexity of love and loyalty. He loved Meghan, but he was increasingly aware that her behavior, intentional or not, was creating harm. The conflict between affection and protection weighed heavily. How do you confront someone you care about deeply when their actions endanger your children? How do you reconcile public admiration for an image with private experiences of fear or instability? Harry wrestled with these questions daily, understanding that any response would have lasting consequences. The struggle intensified when public appearances or social events loomed. Harry had to mask tension, maintain composure, and present a unified image, all while managing private dynamics that could erupt at any moment. The duality of public and private life created enormous stress, forcing Harry to compartmentalize emotions and function under constant pressure. He described it as living in two realities at once, where one misstep in the private realm could have catastrophic public repercussions. The challenge extended beyond immediate protection to long-term planning. Harry thought about the emotional, psychological, and social development of Archie and Lilibet Diana. He understood that repeated exposure to tension and volatility could have lasting effects. He considered strategies for emotional resilience, support systems, and safeguards that could help his children navigate the complicated dynamics at home. Every decision was guided by a singular focus, the well-being of his children. And yet, despite these efforts, Harry was constantly aware that he could not control everything. Children are perceptive, sensitive, and influenced by subtle cues. Adults can attempt to mitigate harm, but they cannot shield completely. The unpredictability of the environment, combined with Meghan's behavior patterns, meant that Harry had to remain vigilant at all times, prepared for moments that could escalate without warning. The struggle to protect his children also highlighted the limitations of privacy. Even in a household designed for security, the emotional impact of incidents could not be fully contained. Harry noticed changes in the children's behavior, hesitation, increased clinginess, and subtle signs of stress. These indicators reminded him constantly that his role as protector required not just vigilance, but also strategic action and timely intervention. And through it all, Harry wrestled with the moral weight of his choices. Speaking up risked confrontation, silence risked harm. Acting decisively risked damaging relationships. Inaction risked the children's safety. Each day, he navigated this delicate balance, driven by an unwavering commitment to protect Archie and Lilibet Diana, even when doing so meant personal sacrifice and public exposure. By the end of this period, Harry's struggle had reached a critical point. The early incidents with Archie and Lilibet Diana, combined with ongoing patterns of tension, had created a scenario where silence was no longer an option. The emotional and physical well-being of the children, the integrity of the family, and Harry's own conscience demanded action. The private reality of the household was too severe to ignore, and the burden of protection could no longer be carried quietly. Harry realized that the next steps would define the course of their family's story. Confrontation, confession, and difficult decisions were inevitable. The struggle to protect his children had become a catalyst for broader revelations. Revelations that would eventually reach the world and shock those who had believed in a carefully curated narrative. And yet, even as he resolved to act, Harry could sense that the story was far from over. The incidents with Archie and Lilibet Diana were only the beginning. The complexities, contradictions, and emotional challenges were deepening, creating a storm that would soon demand a confession of a scale the world could scarcely imagine. Sometimes, the truth isn't obvious at first. It creeps in quietly, disguised as ordinary family tension. But as Harry observed, the early signs of trouble weren't isolated. They were part of a hidden pattern, a rhythm of conflict and control that, over time, escalated into incidents that could no longer be ignored. Harry began to notice the escalation almost instinctively. Small disagreements became confrontations. Subtle flashes of anger became more frequent and more intense. The children, Archie and Lilibet Diana, responded not with normal childhood frustration, but with hesitation, confusion, and sometimes fear. Harry described the change as a slow-burning alarm, a sense that the equilibrium of their family life was tipping toward chaos. These hidden patterns were deceptive. On the surface, life appeared ordinary. Playtimes, mealtimes, and family routines carried the veneer of normalcy. But beneath that surface, a series of triggers and responses unfolded repeatedly. Harry noted that Meghan's behavior followed a rhythm, moments of calm, followed by sudden impatience, abrupt corrections, or displays of control that left both children unsettled. The unpredictability created a psychological tension that Harry could feel, even when the children tried to act cheerful or compliant. Harry realized that these patterns had consequences beyond immediate interactions. Archie began to exhibit small signs of withdrawal. Lilibet Diana became increasingly cautious, hesitant to express herself fully. The children's emotional responses were subtle but telling, fleeting expressions of fear, sudden clinginess, or uncharacteristic silence. For Harry, these cues were alarm bells, signals that the private environment was affecting the children's psychological well-being. What made the escalation even more alarming was how it revealed Meghan's control over the household. Harry noticed a pattern of subtle manipulations, attempts to dictate emotional responses, and strategic displays of authority. This wasn't overt violence or deliberate cruelty, at least not initially. It was a series of behaviors designed to assert control, create compliance, and maintain dominance in subtle ways. And while the public saw poise and grace, Harry witnessed the consequences of this control in the children's responses and in the underlying tension of family life. Harry attempted interventions carefully, balancing caution with necessity. He would step in during moments of conflict, redirecting interactions, reassuring the children, and trying to de-escalate Meghan's frustration. But the pattern persisted. Each intervention was temporary, a bandage over a deeper dynamic that continued to unfold. He realized that this was not about isolated incidents, but about a recurring rhythm, a cycle of tension, confrontation, and temporary resolution that masked an underlying problem. The escalation was compounded by emotional contradictions. Meghan could be loving, nurturing, and affectionate one moment, and sharp, impatient, or controlling the next. The inconsistency was destabilizing, particularly for young children who thrive on predictability and safety. Harry noted that these swings created confusion and anxiety, leaving Archie and Lilibet Diana uncertain about how to navigate interactions, what behavior was safe, and when conflict might arise. Harry also began to recognize the subtle ways the children adapted to these patterns. Archie, for example, sometimes tried to anticipate Meghan's moods, adjusting his behavior to avoid triggering conflict. Lilibet Diana developed caution, careful observation, and a quiet approach to interactions. These adaptive behaviors were not signs of healthy development. They were coping mechanisms in response to an emotionally volatile environment. The hidden patterns extended beyond visible actions to emotional influence. Harry observed manipulation of feelings, the use of guilt, and subtle pressure to comply with expectations. Children, he knew, are highly perceptive. They absorb not only words and gestures but the emotional undertones behind them. The cumulative effect of these patterns was profound, shaping their sense of security, trust, and emotional well-being. As the escalation continued, Harry realized that public appearances and media scrutiny amplified the tension. Meghan's carefully curated public persona created a paradox. She appeared composed and admirable to the world, while privately, the household experienced moments of volatility that were emotionally destabilizing. This dissonance added pressure on Harry, who had to navigate private challenges under the shadow of public expectation, knowing that any misstep could lead to judgment, misunderstanding, or exposure. Harry began to track patterns more consciously. He noted triggers, typical responses, and consequences, building a mental map of the dynamics at play. The incidents weren't random. They followed a rhythm that suggested deeper issues of control, frustration, and tension. He understood that recognizing these patterns was essential not only for immediate protection, but also for long-term planning, ensuring the children's emotional and physical safety, preparing for moments of confrontation, and anticipating future conflicts. The escalation also revealed the limits of private intervention. Despite his vigilance, Harry could not prevent every confrontation or mitigate every emotional impact. The children's responses, the unpredictability of interactions, and Meghan's behavior created an environment where tension could spike suddenly. Harry realized that private management, while necessary, was insufficient. The patterns needed to be addressed directly, decisively, and ultimately, publicly. Though he dreaded the consequences, what compounded the hidden patterns was the cumulative emotional impact. Harry observed a growing anxiety in both children, subtle but persistent. Archie exhibited moments of hesitation and withdrawal. Lilibet Diana displayed increased caution and a need for reassurance. The patterns of escalation were creating a household atmosphere where fear and anticipation replaced spontaneity, trust, and safety. Harry knew that prolonged exposure could have long-term consequences, shaping not just childhood experiences, but emotional development and relational patterns for years to come. In observing these hidden patterns, Harry also confronted his own limits. He questioned whether he had missed earlier signs, whether he could have intervened more effectively, and how he could balance protection with maintaining family cohesion. Every day brought new challenges, requiring acute observation, emotional regulation, and strategic planning. The struggle was relentless, and Harry felt the mounting weight of responsibility more acutely with each passing incident. And yet, despite the escalation, Harry remained committed to maintaining stability for the children. He sought small victories, moments of calm, reassurance, and normalcy. He reinforced routines, created safe spaces, and offered emotional support whenever possible. But he knew these were temporary shields against a recurring, escalating problem. The patterns were persistent, systemic, and escalating toward a moment that could no longer be contained privately. Harry also reflected on the broader implications of these hidden patterns. They weren't just household dynamics. They were a reflection of relational, emotional, and behavioral complexities that, if left unaddressed, could escalate into long-term consequences for the children. He understood that silence or inaction was no longer an option. The patterns needed confrontation, recognition, and ultimately, disclosure. And as Harry watched the subtle interplay of tension, control, and emotional response continue, he understood that a tipping point was approaching. The escalation was building toward incidents that would demand confession, intervention, and public reckoning. The hidden patterns that had been invisible to outsiders were about to become undeniable truths, forcing exposure and setting the stage for revelations that would shock the world. The storm was gathering. Every pattern, every escalation, every subtle act of tension was converging toward a moment when private struggles could no longer be contained. Harry felt it in the household, in the children, and in himself. Some moments in life arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary disagreements. only to reveal their true significance in retrospect. For Harry, the confrontations with Meghan that would change everything didn't start with a headline or public scandal. They started behind closed doors, in the private, invisible world of family life where no one outside could witness the tension. These were the moments that tested his courage, his loyalty, and above all, his role as a protector of Archie and Lilibet Diana. Harry recalled one evening vividly. The children were asleep, and the house was quiet, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Meghan entered the room abruptly, a sharp tone in her voice, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Harry had learned to anticipate these eruptions, to read the subtle cues. The tightening of a jaw, the narrowing of eyes, the controlled but forceful gestures. He knew that once these confrontations started, they rarely followed predictable paths. The first confrontation that night was over something minor, a disagreement about bedtime routines. But minor disagreements were no longer minor. They had become triggers, opening the door to outbursts that were disproportionate, emotionally charged, and frightening for the children.